Okay, good morning, everybody. I'm really glad you're here to learn about CATME. My name is Courtney Seidel. I am clinical faculty in the Communication Sciences and Disorders Department. And I first met John this summer. I had the pleasure of doing both TASI and Blend at UW. And it became really apparent that people want a tool like this, and I got a lot of inquiries, a lot of questions about what is CATME, how do you use it, can you demo it for us, both at Blend at UW and at TASI. And a few of you look familiar from there, so nice to see you again. So today we're going to talk about CATME, what it is. I'm going to talk about how I use it, and there are a few others in the room who are currently using CATME as well for automated group creation. And we're going to try to make better groups for better learning. So what is CATME? It stands for Comprehensive Assessment of Team Member Effectiveness. And they define themselves as a system of secure web-based tools that enable instructors like us to implement the best practices in managing student teams. There are a few different tools under CATME. The two that I use primarily are called TeamMaker and Peer Evaluation. So TeamMaker allows you to create groups and teams, and then Peer Evaluation allows them to complete anonymous reviews of their team members, which I incorporate into their grades. And I know that the handout or the active teaching worksheet that John put together has some really great links to what is CATME. So we're going to try to be more hands-on, right, today, and try to give you some more experiential information. But it has been around for about 11 years. It has been funded for an extremely long time and is now just moving in to a small fee for licensure, which we'll get into as we move along. Okay, so why do I use CATME? So I use CATME because I use a team-based learning approach in all of the courses that I teach. And if you are truly following the research-based approach of team-based learning, then you know that groups have to be properly formed. And so the example that TBL gives is that intellectual talent, for example, should be equally distributed among the groups. And so if you have individuals with 4.0s as GPAs and 2.7s, which hopefully we're not going to have, those individuals would be dispersed among the groups. And the assignment to a team for team-based learning is really emphasizing this resource wealth distribution. And so that can look very different depending on what department you're in and what your student body looks like. So for example, for us, in one of the courses that I teach, it is technically an undergraduate class, but we have a capstone program where individuals who have already received an undergraduate degree in another field are coming back to take those basic courses that they need to further a degree in communication sciences and disorders. These individuals are often middle-aged, they have work experience, and they're a very different population than my sophomores and juniors who are traditional undergraduate students. And I'm sure what you see happening is what I experience, is that those capstone students glum together, and they are their own little posse. I need that wealth that they have distributed amongst all of the groups. I need someone who has career experience, who has something that they can bring to the table at each table, right? The teams are fixed for the whole course, again, if you're following a traditional team-based learning approach. And we would never use student-selected teams in a true team-based learning approach. It also emphasizes that we want diverse teams, which is a similar way of talking about that resource wealth distribution. And it also emphasizes that for TBL, they'd like you to make that selection process transparent to students so that they understand why they are grouped the way that they are grouped. So for me, that is essentially main reason that I became interested in using CATME. Since then, I have used it in a lot of different ways. I've been using it since the spring of 2006 with great success. Yeah, Cliff, you can say something.
I'm so sorry. I don't know how important this is for CATME, but making the selection process transparent. Like, you're the smart kids, we're going to spread you around. You're the not as smart kids, we're going to spread you around.
So you'll see once we get into what questions you ask, you can ask things such as your it'll give you, what's your schedule? Are you male or female? What's your GPA? So there's a variety of different questions so that it's transparent but doesn't emphasize inequalities in any way, shape, or form. Yeah. Okay, great. Okay, and so this is, again, some of the team-based learning ideas that student-selected teams are often just social entities, which again, I'm sure is part of the reason some of you are here, and we know the inherent issues of these social entities when they form their own groups. And actually, student-selected teams underperform when they're compared to instructor-selected teams. So again, a little bit more about how I use CATME. 371 is an undergraduate class that I use this in. 709 and 714 are graduate level courses that I use this with. And then another purpose that we found in our department that works really well is we have a graduate school orientation, almost a week-long process, where we bring them in and introduce them to our expectations, to our building, to our program, to our clinic. And we saw the same thing happening where we were getting a lot of student-selected teams and we were getting those social entities that were starting to form on day one when they come. And all of our undergraduates who were accepted into our graduate school program, they formed a little posse. Everybody who was like from out east would form their own little group. People who were non-traditional students were forming their group. And again, we weren't getting our incoming class to meet each other, to cross those boundaries and to really meet new students that they're going to be spending the next 2 years with. And so we started using CATME to create some groups for our student orientation, and we've had really great success with that because they go through, like you are today, a number of different hands-on activities that they need to group up, and we just found that we were getting much more interaction among them than we were previously. So again, I use TeamMaker and peer evaluations primarily, and we're going to get into some examples of those. Just holler if you have questions. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about CATME and students, and one thing that's really important is that there is no student fee with a department or university license, and many of the folks in the room today actually have pursued a license through their department. We are all very anxious and interested in pursuing some sort of university-wide licensure, and there is a small group of us that are looking at that and what steps we would need to make that happen. I'm going to tell you more about the licensure as we move along because I think that's an important topic to cover. The student account is created automatically when you enter your class. So you use an Excel, a CSV document, and as soon as you say this is the student's name, this is their email address, an account is automatically created for them, and CATME contacts them and says, your instructor has created an account, please go in and complete these following activities. So the students don't have to go in and create their own, things like that, which I have found really streamlines the process. Yeah.
When students drop or add,
so yes, if students drop or add, and that is actually fairly easy. So once you have that information entered, there's a button that just says add student, and if you had students add, you just go ahead and add their information and it'll populate right into the groups that are already created. And there's also an opportunity for you to like check, let's say you had 5 students drop, you would just check their names and be like delete from the class list.
So your groups are not fixed size, so someone adds, you add, do a 4-person group at kind of at random or something.
Yep. Okay. So, and you can determine okay, I want them in this group because this group has 6 and the others all have 7. So you can put them where you want them, or you can just put them in. Pretty flexible.
You can also update the CSV, which is what I do if you have a lot
Yep.
of add drops. So if you update your CSV that you used originally, the CATME has this cool thing where it'll like,
Repopulate.
yeah, it like recognizes the added students and then puts them into your matrix. So if you're having a lot of action in add drop week, I find it nice to just update the CSV because then you can just keep doing that, and if you need it for something else, you have it.
Yeah, and I think Carrie brings up a good point. If you have a very large class, that's the way to go, is just change your CSV document and put it back in again, and it will understand these are the students who are already in groups, these are the ones I need to incorporate. And for me, I've had smaller numbers of add drops, so I just go in and say remove or add. My classes aren't in the hundreds. Okay, and then there is data suggestions that you can release to your students if you wish. And so this is something that I would play around with and view as a student. But what can happen is, let's say that I typically have my students do a mid-semester peer review that is not part of their grade, but it, one, gives them an opportunity to look at the tool and see how are we going to be grading each other at the end of the semester, right? It gives them the expectations so that it's very explicit, and then it also, for some students, can be a little bit of a motivator in the sense of, oh, my team knows I'm not doing the readings and I'm showing up to the group and I don't offer as much as my peers. Looks like I'm going to have to start doing those readings before class. And so I like to do that mid-semester without any grading, without any results. It's just an opportunity for them to, again, see the tool, know what the expectations are for their peer review, and hopefully for those underperforming students, it's a motivator to be more active in their group. And what CATME will do is they have an automated or a populated list of suggestions. So if the students are rating this individual low in one particular area, let's say it's coming to group prepared, CATME populates an email to that particular student that says, here's the feedback from your group, of course worded in a very PC way, that you could come to group more prepared and they look forward to your feedback, and it'll say, we would suggest that you, and they'll give them some general suggestions for improving their performance in the group. You don't have to send those out. It's your choice as to whether you give that feedback to them or not. The other thing that I really like about CATME is, so let's say I'm doing my student orientation in the summer and students aren't checking their email as often, and I'm not seeing a large percentage of them reply to my questions. It'll send out a weekly request automatically to say, hello, you still haven't filled out your CATME, and I don't have to do anything. That happens automatically. You can also go in and say, 2 more days and I'm only at 78%. Send a reminder, and then anyone who hasn't completed it will get an additional reminder that it needs to be completed. On these 2 topics, one thing that I've also found is that I don't know how or why, but I find it very helpful and nice that they don't tend to go into their junk, spam, or secondary folders. So I haven't had a lot of issues with students saying like, oh, I didn't see it, it wasn't in my focused inbox. And I think, partially that is perhaps that they're using their university emails and whatnot, but that's been nice, so that the students have reliably received the emails from CATME. Okay, so this is just a few things that I took from student feedback. And so these are from my student evals at the end of the semester. And I'm just going to read a few of the things that the students said about TBL and CATME. So the composition of groups and variety of work kept the class interesting and required group members to participate in a variety of ways. I appreciate the planning that was required to ensure these groups were productive. This was easily the best group that I've worked with in graduate school, as we had the perfect balance of personalities and teamwork to get work accomplished while respecting everyone's contributions. And I want to highlight this perfect balance of personalities and teamwork. That's something that as you go through the tool, you'll go, oh, it does promote the perfect balance of personalities and teamwork. And this class was the most successful team-based learning experience I've had. Loved my team and thoroughly enjoyed the team-based class experience. Everyone did a fantastic job, and we had a great semester learning from and working with one another. So when we talked about making better teams for better learning, that's the feedback that we want in our student evals, and that's the experience that we want them to have. And how many of you have seen the eye rolling and the sighing when you say that there is a group project? So again, I also get a lot of this in this first statement, the last sentence, that they acknowledge that planning and effort went into those groups, and they appreciate that we were thoughtful and considerate about trying to give them the best learning experience that we can. And then a little bit on CATME and students. So this is a screenshot, hence the blurriness, of a student's actual feedback when she was asked to complete the CATME Team Maker. And one of the things that I really like about this is this was one of our first year students who's coming to us in our graduate program, first semester. We don't know anything about her other than what we saw on her graduate school application. And this information I was able to not only incorporate into me working with her in my class, but we also have a clinical component to our program. And then what I'll do is, if a student gives really great informative feedback like this about who they are, what type of a student they are, what works best for them, I will then screenshot it like this and share it with their clinical supervisor, so that both the academic faculty that work with the student and the clinical faculty that are going to teach them how to be a therapist are aware of what type of a learner the student is and what they need to be successful. So Danielle said, I like to be the leader when it is clear what I have to do. If things are unclear, I tend to step back and quietly brainstorm before taking a chance and leading something that I am unsure of. I am okay with others leading too, but I'm not okay with people doing as little work as possible. Team-based learning calls that social loafing. And so the approach for organizing these groups is to eliminate the social loafer. If a team member does not contribute, I get frustrated with them, but I'm rarely strong enough to confront them and ask for more input, even though I know that is what I should do. I do not like conflict, but I understand that it happens in daily life and I need to grow in that way. So the questions that she answered in CATME prompted her to reflect on these topics. And so this is just an open field that she can share anything with the instructor that she would like. But when we go through, what can I ask when I make my teams? You'll see that you ask things that promote reflection like this. Okay? I just wanted to put up what this looks like, and we can come back to this. I think it's a really nice way to look at it. Tried to chop off their names so they would not be identified. But what we've got is that you'll be able to identify, these are things I commonly ask. So we know what their sex is, what their GPA is, the previous courses, information that you can do as far as have they had prerequisites, what their background is, their age, their hands-on learning style, their leadership role, their leadership preference, whether they are someone who prefers details, big ideas, if they're more balanced. And so for me, these 4 items of hands-on, their leadership role, do they prefer leading, prefer following, prefer one leader, prefer shared leadership, those are things that have really helped me create great groups. So yeah, go ahead.
Question, the GPA, do they give that themselves willingly, or is it something we have a right to ask for, or is that?
I believe that it asks for it, so they would self-provide that. students who haven't answered some questions and it just shows up with a null field.
It just doesn't consider it in the formula.
Yep.
I mean,
You did just see on that spreadsheet that there was it looked like a.
Somebody who didn't answer.
Didn't.
Mhm.
Yep.
Exactly. Yep.
Are there limits or guidelines within this about what you can and can't ask students? Because this is something that's come up with, like, can you ask political orientation? Can you, I mean, there's all sorts of things that might not be appropriate.
And I think that would certainly be more of a university-wide approach. There are things that it allows you to ask race. This came up when we were at Blend at UW. So you can ask things like sex, race, backgrounds like that, but I think you would want to take into consideration, you know, do you have a real rationale, and is that something that would be promoted by the university, or would a student view that they may have been discriminated against because they offered you that information? And I would just say in general, if I thought that a student may feel discriminated against me asking, then I would either want to have some type of very clear disclaimer that it does not need to be answered, or I wouldn't ask it.
there's also a decline to state on race
and gender.
right? There's a decline to state.
That's
So
built into the system, sorry.
Yep, yeah.
But
yep.
it's also, you determine the questions.
Right.
yeah.
So this is just a tool for you to use, and you can make up questions.
Mhm.
So it's up to you to exercise your judgment about what's appropriate questions. It's not gonna.
But it's a good point, because there have been instances, like I said, when I talked about other groups this summer about CATME, some of them are poli-sci classes, and they want, and I feel like if you're teaching a poli-sci class and you want to have good debate in your groups, and you want both sides to be expressed and represented in those groups, that may be a very valid reason in which you might ask something like that. So I can see that there are definitely instances where that's the case, or I think we were talking about like perhaps some of like the courses that may really want to ensure that there's a good distribution of both male and female in groups, and there are good reasons. And so I think that's one of the great things about CATME is you can make it transparent. Like you can tell them in a message, I asked what your gender is because I want each group to have equal representation of male and female. If you're not comfortable sharing that, feel free to decline. But if you have a good rationale, you can tell them. Yeah, Duncan.
A lot of flexibility in CATME, a lot of experience, but the social engineering aspect and the legal aspects of that are really serious.
I agree.
And it would be great if we could actually get some university legal guidance on this.
I think it's great.
And, you know, we judge that it's okay to get this option and blah, blah, blah. But, you know, that may be, understand that quicksand.
You're adding things to our small cohorts list. So Duncan's just saying that it'd be great if we actually had some true legal representation who would share that what would be the best way to proceed based on things considering discrimination and et cetera. I think it's a good idea. Okay, so at UW-Madison, this is the information that I obtained through CATME. They run starting on that July 1st, so in 12 months, UW-Madison has had 9 faculty members using CATME amongst 7 departments. They completed 35 different surveys. We had 585 unique students, and those students did 1,425 surveys. And there are 17 faculty at UW-Madison with CATME accounts. So they may or may not have used them in the last 12-month period. So yeah, go ahead.
Where is all that data stored? What happens at the end of the course? Does the data stay?
Yes, so this comes directly from CATME. I essentially contacted the individual who manages and runs CATME. And you do have an option because CATME, for like I said, the last 11 years has been research-based and funded as a research project. You had an option to release your data to them if you want to allow them to use it anonymously in their research. You do not have to release anything to them. You just don't click release data.
But you could be keeping the data.
What's that?
You could be keeping your own data.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, you could download CSVs of any of the activities that you've that you've done?
And this was developed by Purdue University, correct?
Yep.
Yeah. So they are,
Well, it's like,
yeah.
Okay. Oh, I did just want to emphasize one thing that I had in my notes here. If and when you create your CATME account, if you haven't already, it is imperative that you use your WISC email account. They use that to verify that you are truly faculty or staff. So if you are having a TA create an account or something like that, really imperative that you're using your WISC account.
And do you say that an exclusion to at compsci.wisc.edu, or do you mean?
Nope, I think as
just has
long
to
as
have
it has that
WISC.edu,
WISC.edu, you will be fine. And they do really, I just was explaining, I had a little hiccup once. They do use that to define who the advisors and supervisors or fact staff are, because I had an individual who taught one of the courses that I taught. She created a CATME account, and then she opted to come back as a student. And when I attempted to add her to our orientation, it said, we will not add this person. This is a faculty member, not a student. And they're like, this individual has a faculty account. And so they do use it to just kind of vet. And also students should always use their WISC account as well. Okay, so
Did you want to say the thing that we talked about this morning about TAs?
oh yeah, so TAs as well. Like if you have a TA who's in your class, or in, let's say Carrie's TA in our department is in my class, then they would need to have like separate faculty accounts for her to work with Carrie and a student account in order to be working with me. So you just have to have those separate.
And how do you do that? If it's, I mean, if they're using the same email.
So that's what we were saying, is that you may have to either have, like, you might have to actually email Dan or someone and say, this is my TA. They need to be able to have access as a student and access to my information.
In the middle of the page under easy request to CATME instructor account, there's a little note there that Jennifer has looked into this already, and it says that you might have to send an email explaining your request.
So just to make sure, you said that there's no charge for the students when they are enrolled in, but then there's no charge for the instructor either?
So there is, and we're going to get to licensing in just a bit. You can get a departmental or a university-wide license, and then students are not charged anything. So I know that they are also, so CATME is just moving into this licensure business, and they're really trying to iron everything out on how to invoice departments or how to invoice universities. And so they've actually been really great about working with us in the sense that they just said anybody who's been using CATME can keep using CATME, and we'll worry about invoicing you and figuring out payments in the future. So I know a lot of us who are in our little cohort were worried, like, oh no, the fall is coming, we want to use CATME, and they were just like, go ahead, just get started, and we can iron out those details as we move ahead.
they just started a cost recovery.
Yep, exactly. Yep, so they just, and there is some information available on that. Duncan was just saying they just started a cost recovery because their grants are running out. Okay, so I put up a couple of quotes from folks that are in this kind of cohort that I've been referencing. So there are, of those 9 who have actively been using CATME. I asked some if they would share a couple of their quotes that we've had in our threads. And so this is from Sean Palasek, UW Chemical Engineering, who I don't think is here today. I don't think he could attend. There seems to be a lot less drama with the CATME assigned teams than with students picking their own groups or with random assignments. The most useful feature has been matching students that have the same schedules, so I don't get the excuse that the team could never find the time to meet. The peer evaluation is also great, knowing that they will evaluate each other and that their grades depend on these evaluations in part seems to have helped ensure good project participation. And so that's a really common feedback item, is that it eliminates this issue of your students trying to schedule outside of your course. So if you are someone who has outside of class time requirements for your groups, CATME can really help facilitate them actually having the same schedules and having time to meet outside of class. I cannot emphasize Sean's feedback on the peer evaluation enough. That is one of those underpinning foundational ideas of team-based learning, is that their participation in their group is a component of their grade. And research tells us that if that is not the case, then we're going to continue to have social loafers, and we're going to have people who are going to sit back and let somebody else do all of the work, and it's going to facilitate that cycle that many of these students have experienced already.
I was developing a course based on team-based learning, and I ran into the problem that at the level of the curriculum committee, I got a comment back that said students cannot give each other grades. And so I was wondering, have you ever run into any discrepancy between, you know, the University of Wisconsin's policy about assigning students grades and who actually assigns grades or components of grades, whether
Right.
it's instructors or whether it...
Yeah, that's a great point, because in a sense, they are sharing a rating of an individual's performance. And if I don't feel like that is adequate, and I felt like a student, you know, for some reason, the team backlashed against a student for some outside social reason, well then I would adjust that grade, and I'm giving the student the grade, not necessarily their peers. But I think that's another good topic for us to look into, is the idea of them, you know, I think there are instances where you might have like a peer review, and the peers are assessing and grading their essays and things as well. So I think that's an interesting point.
Well, I think the point is that they're giving a recommendation for a grade
Exactly.
for the instructor to go in and modify if necessary.
Also, CATME has some, and I haven't been using it as long as Courtney has, but there's some flags that when you get the peer reviews back, there are some flags like, this might not be a really valid indicator of this student's performance because of, can you speak to that?
Yep,
because I
absolutely.
can't do it adequately.
Yep.
But there's some things that CATME calls your attention to as an instructor that you might want to think harder about this.
Yeah. So they'll consider if, let's say, one student was very discrepant in their ratings compared to their other team members. So let's say that there are 5 members in the group, and student A got generally 4.5s from 3 of their team members, and if this last student rated them 2s and 3s, CATME is going to flag that and say, you might want to look at this closer because this person significantly underrated compared to their peers. And so I remember in one of my first semesters, I unknowingly had an ex-couple in a group and didn't know until the end of the semester. CATME is going to point out to me that for some reason, you know, whoever's heart was broken may have had extreme ratings against that particular individual when the rest of the group thought that he or she showed up prepared and contributed well. So there are some really nice, and even some over ratings too. So if someone is like, oh, 5s across the board, and then other people were, you know, being more precise in their ratings, they're going to say, this person overrated in comparison to their peers. Maybe they have a crush, right? Who knows? But yeah, so there are some really great tools like that. Okay, so next we're going to look at a quote from Cindy, who is here today. So Cindy said that, and I loved Cindy's. I emailed her right away and said, can I have this, please? Can I use this? She's used CATME for several classes and has had great experience with it. It has been a big help even in the smaller classes that I teach. I've used both the Team Maker functionality and the evaluation function. For the Team Maker process, I ask only 2 questions, your major and your schedule. Since I teach engineering students who have very full and fixed schedules, the ability to see the schedules for different combinations of students has been very important. Using CATME has made me more comfortable about the team groupings with which I finally end up with, and has made students who get in groups that may not have schedules that mesh well less likely to get annoyed with me because they know that I tried. And so I think that is very, very true. The other thing that I wanted to emphasize, and I really liked about Cindy's comment, is that this does have great functionality regardless of your class size. So we have used it with larger classes, and we've also used it with smaller classes, and have had really good successes with that. Yeah.
How much can the students see about one another?
Oh, I don't think that the students can see anything about one another. No, if you release that
their schedules.
feedback,
Schedule?
Just the
yep,
schedule.
yep, the schedule they can see.
And their names, the
Yep.
names and schedule, oh, and email contact.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think they
email
can see
contact.
emails. Yeah, so I think names, emails, and schedules would be all that they could see. So Cindy also shared that for team evaluations, she likes that it allows her to see how team members compare each other, so she gets a better sense of team members' strengths and weaknesses and who really stepped up to lead the team. And so so we'll say again, if we have a group of 5 and they are asked to do either their mid-semester or their end of semester evaluations of each other, you will be able to see what every student ranked their peers as. And so you can really see, like, wow, everybody gave a lot of 5s to Cindy. She must have really been the leader. She really rose to the occasion. And so you sort of get like a profile is kind of how I would describe it for each student to see what their performance has been. Okay, so I've got just a couple of slides left, and I thought we might want to touch on the future of CATME at UW-Madison. So this is where I wanted to just be sort of transparent and give you a better idea of, like, if I wanted to pursue licensure, what would that look like? And so the Communication Sciences and Disorders Department had 84 students participate in surveys in the last year. So our license for this coming year was $168 for our entire department. Yeah, and we're in. We're paid.
Wow.
Yeah.
We paid our bill.
You did.
Is that $2 per student?
That's roughly what they run, yep. And so you'll see if you pursue licensure, that is how they describe it, is $2 per student. Thanks, Daniel.
So they determine it based on last year's use?
Yes.
So if you encourage all your colleagues to use it this year, next year the fee will be higher?
Yeah, if we use more students, but I think they're individual students. So if you're all working with the same student, they're not going to charge $2 for Cindy to be in Carrie's class and $2 for Cindy to be in mine. It's going to be per individual student. So if you're working with the same student body, increasing the number of instructors who are using CATME shouldn't necessarily increase your price. Let's say if we only had undergraduate faculty using it, and now our grad student faculty want to start using it, well, then we'd have a new student population. So, the physics department has purchased for 2017 and 18. They are planning on using it for introductory physics with an enrollment of at least about 80. They're considering some other courses as well. Do we have anybody from physics here today? Duncan? That's great. And then the chemical engineering department had 128 unique students last year, so their fee for this coming school year would be $256.
This $2 a student thing. Well, maybe. I mean, they just invented this number, and I think they would have charged me for a thing if they actually gave me access without it, and then I said, well, I'll pay you anyway. But I don't know that it's going to be $2 a student.
I think in the end,
I
it's
think
probably
this
not
is
gonna
not
be.
about making money. They're running
Nope.
this off the engineering department server, and they're just trying to do a little cost recovery for the engineering department. So,
That's at Purdue.
yeah, they're still running it, but it's just self-supported. At the moment, it's kind of what's going on. They're using it heavily for these, so that it's just continuing to run. But probably the IT department and engineering said, no. This is
A little
it's
coaster
a cash cow, we ought to, but you know,
Yeah.
they're still not
Right.
commercial.
Well, and I think, you know, all of the interactions that we've had with Dan Ferguson have really echoed
Oh,
that.
he's been great.
He's been great, yeah. Yep, absolutely. And he's very much indicated that Yeah, they're not looking to cash out, they just need to maintain, and like you say, cost recovery is a
Yeah,
great way to
so,
put
so,
that.
you know, I mean, their costs don't scale.
And he also has really expressed more interest in us having a university license, where then we're not looking at $2 a student. They're just going with that formula to have something to get started. Yeah, John?
So I've got a question about Dan Ferguson. Is he the only support person for CATME?
No, I don't believe so, but he's the one who tends to reply directly. So I have gotten like general @CATME, no reply types of emails, but he's been the one who's interacted with us most directly as far as licensure and trying to move forward with something university-wide.
I don't think there's any reason, this is public code, I mean, you pay for the taxes, if we wanted to just learn on our own service, we could just
Get to that. So then the next question is, for those of you who have used it, how easy was it, the learning curve? Because when I first looked into it, you know, I can get through the first couple of screens, but it's kind of clunky. And there are some errors that we ran into just in making the activity sheet that were like, I don't know how to fix this. I don't know how to get around
And
this.
I was surprised because I personally have not really had any error issues. I think for Carrie and I, our learning curve was figuring out how to make sure that your CSV matches the code that they want. Make sure it's titled, first name, last name, ID, that kind of thing. And that was really my only learning curve. I found it to be pretty easy to use. Feedback?
I actually haven't figured out how to do the
Oh.
CVS one. I gave up on that because I teach small. I have around 60, 70 students a semester. I just entered in their emails.
What was the
But
thing that
other
was
than that,
in
it's easy.
CSP, that
Remember you had to go down and select it at the very bottom. I remember I had a little note from you that said you had to scroll down to the bottom.
and put the cursor in that box at the bottom?
I have notes on it.
Yeah.
But once I got the stuff in there, it's not that hard. I mean, there are, every once in a while you have to click extra steps. I think
Yeah.
they could make the
User interface a little bit nicer.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
in
It's
terms
basic.
of putting together the survey, running the survey, and I will spend an hour or more for each section running. I mean, this is a nice thing. This semester, I would encourage you to lobby the university to do this, because I'm not in a department. I'm in a program that serves all of the College of Engineering. So if all the instructors in my program use this, we're talking about hundreds of students a year for a program that is just a little program, not a big department. So please encourage the university to have a license so we can afford this. But
The university doesn't listen to me.
right. But the thing is, this semester I did it by paper, so I did a survey that would look like CATME in the majors, and so I'm shuffling papers around, and it takes more time. And I realized there were iterations of the survey that I would run here, so I could do it only on your major, only on your schedule, 50%, both of them, and then iterations of all of that. And I might spend an hour or more with a section where I wasn't getting the teams I liked, but I could do that, just run iteration after iteration. It's easy to
So
do.
just kind of experiment and see what works.
Right, it's
Yeah.
easy to do, and the amount of time it takes is.
Yeah, I was hoping Cindy was going to bring up her experience of, okay, so I used CATME, and then this last semester, I tried to do the same thing on paper, and it really emphasizes how efficient this program is to create those groups for you. And one of the things I wanted to emphasize is on the sheet that John has given you, on the very back side, right at the top, there's kind of these little rating scales. And this is something that Cindy alluded to in her comment, is that let's say you find something to be especially important in your groups, you can weight that as such. So you can say, you know, maybe GPA is something that is the most important. You know, for me, it might be more along those lines of, I like to know what kind of a team member are you? So I might say my leadership preference is really important. I really want to make sure that they're in groups that fit their leadership preference? Do they want shared leadership? Do they want one leader, right? That might be something that I feel is really important. So I can weight that accordingly. If I don't think, especially at our grad program level, our GPAs are all pretty similar. We accepted them based on their GPAs. So perhaps GPA is something that I don't need weighted as heavily in my graduate school groups, but maybe in my undergrad, we've got a lot more discrepancy there in how they're performing in their GPAs. So I might weight that higher to make sure that, again, that intellectual distribution occurs in my undergrad classes. Yeah, Duncan?
So about transparency, how are you, so do you publish in advance the algorithm for you?
No. So as far as transparency, it's just the questions that they answer, just so that they know these are the factors I'm considering in making your groups. I don't give them any additional detail as to weightings.
But they have the option of, for example, listing their gender and putting it as a negative weight to not be, or to be considered flipped.
No, the instructor weights it.
Well, the students can enter their weight. So the instructor has an algorithm that weights various things, but as the students enter the data, they can choose to weight it any particular characteristic, +5, 0, don't use this, don't touch this.
Oh, I didn't know that. I haven't seen that.
Or negative weight, so you can, my idea
I've
is,
seen it on the instructor end, but I've never seen that on the students end.
well, I don't
For the
know
students,
this, but
it
that's my
should be
recollection.
just
They
a
have
drop down. It would be just like a field of my GPA is 3.4, and they plug that in, and it's just a field. And when we go through, you'll be able to see the questions as the student sees them.
So about the going through there, we actually only have 4 minutes
Yeah.
left.
Yeah.
So what I wanted to do was,
quarter up?
oh yeah, I guess we got 15 minutes.
We've got 20 minutes.
Yes, 20 minutes.
No,
Yeah.
that's what the physicist.
Sorry.
Yeah, right? I'll
So,
go to the.
Courtney doesn't work at CATME, by the way. I don't know if you can
Oh,
tell
yeah.
that by the way that she's talking about it, but clearly an advocate. Based on what you've heard so far, those of you who have not used it, what are your thoughts? Do you think it's a useful thing for your course, and in what way, and how might you use this sort of group instruction?
So I have a lot of class that over the last several semesters I've just done random sit wherever, which doesn't work, as we've talked about. And I was planning to do put some more work into group construction the next semester. But I was gonna go use a survey, and it's 40 students. But I was thinking of using like Qualtrics to get the data and then be able to look at it in a spreadsheet. Because there might be things I don't want to wait for some groups. I don't know, I'm not sure.
Oh, that's a good point. So if you can self-manipulate in groups. So CATME will put out a recommendation for your grouping, and then you can go in and say, nope, move this student down here. Like one time I had in the comments a student say, if I could please be paired with Jennifer Johnson, that would be excellent. And I was like, boom, you two are not going to be together, right? And so then if those two happen to have gotten paired in the same group based on their responses, then I went in and said, Jennifer, you're going to group 1.
And you can actually run the iterations where you
Multiple
say,
times. Yeah.
either don't ever put these students together,
Yes.
or always have these students together. So sometimes in my grouping, I'll have 2 because of schedule and interest. The interest is important because they're doing written reports on technical topics, and I need to have people who can have similar knowledge base for this. So I can put 2 people together, and I still need a third in the group, and I can run iterations that always have those 2 people together.
For the next couple, you might be like,
Yeah, always.
Yeah, I had a student that told me in advance that he was being called for active duty for hurricane relief, and he wouldn't be here for certain things, so I made sure that he was not in the group that had to be presenting on that day, so it turned out to be really handy.
It would seem especially useful in larger online classes where the diversity is much wider, and the schedules might be even more diverse than in a face-to-face setting.
When
one of the the undergraduate anatomy course I work with, we have a lab component, and we just decided to create for this semester a group project. And the makeup of these classes are usually cohorts of students, like all the ATs, all the athletic trainers, and all the nurses, and of course in the lab class they group together. And one of our goals is to ensure that they're getting practice with interdisciplinary groups, because when they're out in the field, that's how they're going to be working in the clinics. And so if we would have been able to implement this, you know, where it's a brand new thing. So next semester I'm going to encourage our instructors to implement this. I think this will help with the goals we're trying to accomplish.
I can see this really applying for a lot of situations, a lot of larger classes, but I work with international students, and one thing I notice is the criteria are very centered on the kind of things that would be important for US students. It doesn't have first language spoken, which is the main characteristic.
It does have comfortability with written and spoken English.
But there are students already placed at a level where they have similar comfortability with that. So
something that I've done
first language
before,
spoken is the main one, because we try to avoid grouping.
Right.
Students are going to speak in.
yeah, you can ask them other
So if you can,
factors. You could ask, you know, what is your English language proficiency? You could have them answer.
Yeah,
so you can customize them as
Yes.
criteria.
Yep. There's a question manager that we can, I don't know if we can demonstrate it without erroring out on you, but I think we can play with that. But those of you have you created your own questions? Easy?
Yeah, the
Easier than CSV.
hard part is once you create a question, it's there forever.
Okay.
So like I used to use this for a first year course where I had topics, 6 topics, and I wanted to know the preference for which topic they wanted to work on. And the topics changed semester by semester. So, I mean, one topic out of the 6 might. So I always had to create a new question if I changed one of the topics, because I couldn't get rid of the old question. I think that was the case, but it was easy to create it, hard to get rid of it.
So then it stays on your survey? Or it?
Well, I don't choose it. It's like
Right, it'll be an option.
So I would just not choose that option, but when you go into my account and look at all my questions, there's still these custom questions at the bottom that I no longer use.
So you can ask 2 questions or 20 questions, like there's.
Absolutely.
Right.
And then, oh, sorry, but so, are you then able to, let's say you're having just a discussion this week on something that's relevant, so that you want to search on just one criteria of what you previously asked. Can you do
Yeah,
that,
so,
or is it
okay,
only-
so let's say we'll say you're in like mid-semester and you're gonna do this project and you want it all grouped on, let's pretend the topic, right? So that they were asked 6 topics. You could go back in and say remake teams. You'd move all of the other answers that they all the other questions that they answered to like don't consider, and then you'd say remake the teams based on the 6 topics that they were asked.
Okay. Can I ask one? So you see it useful to, you're talking about teams, so it sounds like long-term team projects, but if you just wanted to have mixed discussion groups every week, you could just keep
Absolutely.
doing
You'd
that.
go in each week and say remake teams, and then it
just
will
distribute
redistribute them again.
Based on whatever criteria you use is
Yep.
important for that week.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, I love this because it's making me see the diversity and how it can be applied to all of these other things.
How are the students told what group they're in? Do you just get a printout, or does it email the students?
So you
and
can
say you're in
release it to them and it'll say, you're in group 1, and it'll tell them who's in it. I have often just said, hey, thanks for filling out CATME, put up the PowerPoint that says group 1, group 2, group 3, go and get in your groups kind of thing.
So because all of this semester is focused on Canvas, let's make that connection. So then in Canvas, what you could do is just create the different groups, and then they could go sign up for the one that they were assigned. Or you could assign them based on, make it manually as well. So you get different options.
I also
So they
have
can self-enroll in some Canvas, right?
If you
Or
set it up that way, yeah.
So I also just put a couple of comments up on Canvas and CATME. So the team participation, like I said, is factored into my students' final grade. And so my reader and grader that did this for me last semester, I contacted him last week and I said, hey, tell me about your process in taking that information from CATME via the CSV and inputting it into our grading in Canvas. And he was like, it was pretty easy. And I was like, can you elaborate on that? And he's like, it was fine. He's like, and he's a very, he does a lot of coding, very data-driven PhD student, and he tends to over-manipulate data beyond what he needs to. And he was like, I didn't have to write anything, I didn't have to do anything. He's like, it transferred into Canvas very easily. And so you can download all of your information. You could download your team makers into a CSV. You can download their evaluation, their peer evaluation into a CSV, and that's what he used to just essentially transfer the CSV from CATME into their grades.
So, a couple of questions. How did the student training go? Did you have the students train? That's number one. And the other is, at what level did you get participation, and were you requiring? Did you have like weekly team meetings so students were needing to participate in the rating system every week, and then what level of participation?
So the level of participation, my students are in groups every single week for class. And so they are seated in that group every single class period. So they come in and go right to group 1's table, and they work together every single class period.
Participation in the rating process of their peers.
Oh yeah, I had great participation in the rating process. I would say I've always had like high 90s. I've had that instance where there may be 1 or 2 students who did not complete their peer ratings, but I have always had very high participation.
If they don't do any of them, or they just missed one?
They just didn't do them.
At all?
At all.
Okay.
So they didn't rate any of their 5 team
I'm not
members.
doing this.
Yep.
Or I didn't, or I spaced it, or
Right,
I just lost
exactly.
different reasons students don't complete assignments, right?
No, I thought she said there were students who didn't do any for the entire semester or whatever.
Well, I only have them rate at mid-semester and at final.
Oh, okay, so I misunderstood again, that's what I was asking. So you aren't asking them to rate every week?
I'm not at,
They're
no.
all in one big group, and so it's low-headed.
No, and I also think, you know, everybody's gonna have a bad day, everybody's gonna come unprepared once. I want them to go like 8 weeks and then assess how their team, how to, they have to have time to get their group dynamic and figure each other out. So I have never done more than mid-semester and final.
I'm doing it.
You're doing it. So I'm looking at trying to do it like every week and switch them around.
You,
No, switch them around. Well, then you would need to do them every week if you're switching
Yeah.
them
Right,
around every week.
yeah. And I'm just wondering what the headache bubble is for students, so it's just ask.
well, I
No,
also
the
think,
system take care of it, it's not a headache for me.
right.
It's just automatic, it's just like programming it, so.
I think it could be an easy post-class assignment
give
for
them
them
5
to
minutes.
complete. And I was gonna say, they could do it in just a few minutes if you said, okay, now everybody sit down and
Yeah, so how long,
complete
so
your
what
rating.
about, did you train, you know?
I haven't done, okay, so what Duncan's asking about is there is an option in here that you can like train the students how to complete the evaluation. And it'll give them feedback too, and we'll say like, wow, you may be an overrater, you're really rating things very high, or it'll just take them through the process as practice. I have not done that because I have seen students get really confused about what is this? I don't know my team yet. I don't know what I'm ranking. They don't have the context and the background of what we're doing. And then by week 8, when they're like, oh, this is team-based learning, she's really explicit about what her expectations are for us, then they sit down and are like, oh, okay, it wants me to rank everybody on their preparedness when they come to class. It wants me to rank them on their knowledge and skills and contribution of what they're bringing. And so then I think it's a lot more clear to them what they're filling out. When they've done the practice, they've been like, what is this? What am I getting? What is this email? I don't know what it is. So I have not done that
You
traditionally.
can see that if you log in and you'll get a chance to go through that practice thing or the peer evaluation thing. I too was confused as I went through it. I was like, it gives you a paragraph about this is what the person's like. How do you rate them now based on that paragraph? And I'm like, that's not enough information for me to.
Exactly. Yeah, it's not a rich enough context.
Yeah.
And you didn't actually see that person and work with them in
Right.
a group to say, yeah, and in comparison to my other team members, right? I think that's a crucial point is they just give you a scenario or a bio of an individual and then you rate that individual. But I think the group is so much more complex
Right.
where they might say, well, yeah, Cliff comes really prepared, but in comparison to John, you know, so I think that is
Well, I
an
think it's
important-
useful because I think that I give the training right before the first time that they do any evaluation. I don't require them to do the training again ever, but I think it's really useful. And I think that there's all of these
Yeah,
problems,
right.
but what I noticed when I did the training right before the first evaluation as opposed to when I didn't, is that the evaluations tended to be, they tend to inflate each other's scores, and they weren't so inflated when I gave the training first.
Yeah.
Like they seemed a little more willing to rate someone low on something, which, you know, it increases the variability, of course, in your sample and gives you a better idea of what's what, right? Instead of having them all rate each other
Right,
fives.
and I would take away, you know, I think that is very true, so I would just take away, if you tell them to do the training, teach them what the training is before they're asked to
Yeah, because I
complete
did
it.
have one student say, are we getting graded on how well we did the training? And I was like, no.
So the other thing about,
Now you can ask different questions in the evaluations, right? It's supposed to evolve into various,
Mm-hmm.
key, practice indicators and stuff, right? So how, you had three, how did you choose to rotate the kinds of things students were being asked? in the
They're
evaluation?
being asked the same thing
Yep,
each
I use the
time.
same
It's the
thing.
same, so you picked those, you didn't let them.
And because I release them to the students over the course of the semester, then they have a chance to improve, and hopefully. And I'm still, I was asking the group that were, I'd like to know grading schema, because what I'm thinking about this semester, because I'm rating them 3 times, is dropping one. And it will probably be the first one, like just, you know, they got used to doing the
But
tool.
you're actually using the evaluations as for grading. not the
Yeah, they have,
participation evaluations,
I'm
actual
using
evaluations.
5% of their grade is based on their peer evaluations,
Which is reflective of their participation.
and it's a total case-based learning class, so they're in their groups every single class doing case-based learning and neurology, so.
But there are, so how did you pick your questions? Because there are hundreds of questions that they can be asked, that's in the database, right, for these evaluations. How did you pick the ones that you chose?
I picked the ones that were most reflective of team participation.
And I try to pick very few questions
So you
because
get
I don't.
3 forms.
Yep, I think
Yeah,
I
I don't want them to be
maximum
working on
4 or
these
5.
for 20 minutes. I want them to be working on them for 5 minutes, you know.
I think I use 3 questions.
Mhm.
That go to things like, did this person come to meetings on time? Did you think they took the process seriously?
So the ones
Just-
that I include in my evaluation are, what was their contribution to the team? How did they interact with their team? Do they keep the team on track and focused, or are they the derailer? Are they expecting high quality from the group? And do they have the knowledge and skills in the group? So those are the ones that I choose. And I think these are also the ones that CATME defaults to. So I didn't change them much.
My thought was, with all these questions, the value was actually not in all the evaluation feedback, it's just for them to be exposed to the various dimensions of teamwork.
Yes.
And just to get them,
Yes.
just to be asked those questions for the first time ever.
Mm-hmm.
In 100
Yeah.
of them.
One of the things that I think a lot about is how do I think about people that I work with clinically?
Huh?
What's important to me?
I think you're saying you learned something.
Yeah, that, and so I reflect on my clinical work and go, okay, what was important to me about my team? Like, I want them to show up on time, I want them to be waiting around, I want them to know what they're talking about and not overspeak. So I picked questions that I thought that they would be interfacing with professionally later. so it's teaching them the importance of these qualities before they get into a professional setting, so that they know that, you know, their team in the hospital is probably going to be thinking about these same things.
I would also just emphasize that John put a lot of the main links that can be very informative for you. So there is a how to watch a video on how to create a class. So they have a YouTube video that's really informative and takes you through, which would give you an opportunity to kind of further this active component of today, to be able to see what it looks like. They'll run through some demos for you, and then getting in there and playing around with it yourself.
Yeah, I think you really have to get into it. You got to get into it. To understand it, you got to get into it. And I got into it a little bit, but this was super informative. To respect your time, I want to make sure that we let you guys out. Courtney, can you stick around for a little bit longer?
You bet, absolutely.
And then Carrie will stick around because you're the
Always
ride.
my
So
ride.
awesome. I think we've got the room officially till 10 o'clock. Please help me thank Courtney for coming and sharing.